July the 21st of 2014. It is morning, Lake St. Clair on the border of Michigan and Canada. According to eyewitnesses, 40-year-old Thomas Rowling and his 16-year-old son Ethan got into their small motorboat and launched from the Harrison Township Pier at 7:30. They were planning a short fishing trip and promised to be back by lunchtime. 9 years have passed. In August of 2023, while working on a dry arm of the bay, an excavator came across a metal hull covered in sand. It was the Rawlings boat. Inside, in addition to the damaged equipment, was a thing that did not belong to either of them. A small wooden fish-shaped figurine with an incomprehensible sign engraved on it. And it was this discovery that forced investigators to reopen the case, which they had thought had been erased from the newspapers forever. Thomas Rowling was born and lived all his life in Harrison Township, a small town on the shores of Lake St. Clair. He was 40 years old and worked for a local repair company, specializing in the installation of boat engines and small machinery. People knew him as a calm, thoughtful, and responsible man. His son Ethan, a 16-year-old schoolboy, was in the 11th grade and dreamed of becoming a biologist. They shared a simple but important tradition. Once a week, they went out on the water together. For Thomas, it was an opportunity to take a break from work and spend time with his child. And for Ethan, it was a way to share time with his father that would be etched in his memory forever. Lake St. Clair is not as well known as the Great Lakes that surround it, but it was the heart of the local community. Fishermen gathered here, summer boating competitions were held here, and families from neighboring towns came here. The water was calm, with a morning haze that lay on the surface in a thin veil. In July, the sun rose early, painting the horizon with gold and red hues. The pier in Harrison Township, from which the Rowlings set out that day, was familiar to many. It was here that they left their car, here that they stood in line with other fishermen to launch their boat. The neighbors remembered. Thomas was always an attentive father. He taught Ethan how to drive a motorboat, explained how to handle a fishing rod, how to distinguish between currents, and recognize the weather by the color of the sky. Ethan loved listening to him tell stories about his childhood when Thomas himself went to the lake with his father for the first time. In their family, fishing was not just a hobby, but a kind of ritual passed down from generation to generation. On July 21st, 2014, they set out early. Thomas got up at about 6 o'clock, made coffee, and checked the gear that was stored in the garage. Ethan, sleepy but enthusiastic, brought out the vests, a box of bait, and a small cooler for the catch. Thomas's wife, Alice, recalled that her husband kissed her on the cheek as he left and said, "We'll be back in time for dinner, and we'll cook fresh fish." That was the last time she saw them both. At 7:30, they were spotted by several fishermen they knew on the pier. Witnesses later described that Thomas was wearing a light-colored short-sleeved shirt and a baseball cap, and Ethan was wearing a blue t-shirt with a school emblem. They looked calm and smiling. Their boat, a small motorboat, was in good condition, with a new engine that Thomas had installed himself just a few months ago. There was no sign of any problems. The atmosphere that morning seemed casual. People were loading gear, starting their engines, greeting each other. Coffee and donuts were being sold on the shore, and children were running along the pier. No one paid much attention when the Rawlings boat left the shore. The water spread out in several circles behind the stern, and the small vessel slowly headed deeper into the lake. It was so familiar that no one could have imagined that in a few hours this departure would be the beginning of the biggest local mystery in decades. Investigators later retraced the route. According to friends, Thomas usually headed for a quiet cove about 3 miles from the pier. There, among the reeds and old wooden pilings, was good fishing. Only the locals knew this place. Probably, that day he wanted to teach his son another trick, how to look for fishy places by the behavior of birds. Ethan has always been fascinated by such trifles. He wrote them down in a notebook, dreaming of one day writing a book about the nature of the lake. No one saw them turn from the main channel. No calls or messages were recorded after they left in the morning. The only evidence of their presence on the water was a few photos taken by a random tourist from another boat. The blurry image shows the silhouettes of 2 people in a motorboat. This was the last confirmed trace. The weather was calm that day. Forecasters noted only a light wind and a temperature of about 27 degrees. No storm warnings were issued. It was even more surprising when it became clear that they never returned. Alice began to worry around 2 in the afternoon when her husband's phone was not answering. At first she thought they were late because of a good catch, but when evening came and the car was still at the pier, her fear turned to panic. Her house keys, wallet, and even Ethan's favorite Walkman were still inside. It seemed impossible. Neither Thomas nor his son would have left such things behind. That was the end of their usual fishing morning. What had been a family tradition turned into the beginning of a long story of obscurity. Thomas and Ethan were never seen alive again. On July 21st, 2014, at 24 hours, 45 minutes, the Macomb County Sheriff's Office received a call. It was Alice Rawlings, Thomas's wife. Her voice was described in the report as anxious and shaking. She reported that her husband and son had not returned from a fishing trip, although they were supposed to be home that afternoon. The officer on duty took note of the call and directed the crew to the pier in Harrison Township. At 21 hours and 30 minutes, the patrol officers were already inspecting the Rawlings car. It was parked in the same spot where it had been seen in the morning. The locks were undamaged and the doors were closed. The driver's seat was pushed back, as Thomas always did. There were a few personal items left in the cabin, as if waiting for the owners. There were no signs of haste or escape. The first hours were inconclusive. The police checked the coastline and interviewed fishermen who were still returning from the water. Everyone confirmed that Thomas and Ethan had gone out on the lake at about 7:30 in the morning, but no one had seen them return. There was no other mention of the boat. On July 22nd, at 7:15, the search and rescue operation was officially launched. The Coast Guard, units of the Department of Natural Resources, and several dozen volunteers were involved. The captain of the local Coast Guard was in charge of drawing up the action plan. His report states, "The main goal is to comb the area of water within a 5-mile radius of the pier. Special attention is paid to bays and areas with underwater snags." In the early morning, Coast Guard boats took to the water. Helicopters with thermal imagers took to the air. A mobile headquarters was set up on the shore to receive all the information. Every hour was recorded in a journal. 8:30, the northern section was examined. No results. 11:00, the fairway to the mouth of the bay was checked. No signs. 14:15, an aerial inspection was conducted. No boat was found. The divers went down in the most dangerous places where the current could have dragged the boat to the bottom. They worked for hours, but found nothing. On the same day, the search continued until dark. Only at 22 hours 40 minutes did the headquarters announce the completion of the first stage. The report was short. No results, no targets found. It came as a shock to the Harrison Township community. Almost everyone knew Thomas. He repaired boats for his neighbors, helped out at competitions, and always had a kind word for his colleagues. Ethan was active in school, played baseball, and had a reputation as a diligent student. Their disappearance could not be accepted as an accident. On July 23rd, the search was expanded. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the Coast Guard announced that additional crews from neighboring cities had joined the operation. The search area increased to 10 miles. Dogs trained to search for scent in the water were brought in. At the same time, the police began to check all possible versions. The documents documented 3 main areas. The first was an accident on the water when the boat overturned and the current carried the bodies away. Second, a premeditated crime, kidnapping or assault. Third, voluntary disappearance, the escape of the father and son. The last option was quickly rejected because all the money, documents, and even the phone were left in the car. In addition, as the neighbors noted, there were no prerequisites for the escape. On July 24, at 11:15, the first discovery appeared in the report. An empty plastic bait bucket was found on the surface of the water. It was damaged, with no clear marks. Divers brought it on board, but experts could not confirm that it belonged to the Rawlings. It was only the color and shape of the bucket that resembled the one they had seen in their car. The next 2 days were crucial. All forces were thrown into combing every bay, every island. Helicopters flew from morning to evening. The press was already writing headlines. Father and son missing on Lake St. Clair. The family came to the headquarters every day, hoping to hear at least some news. Alice gave interviews, reiterating that her husband and son were experienced fishermen and would never take unnecessary risks. On the evening of July 25th, after 5 days of fruitless searching, the police officially admitted, "The probability of finding them alive is minimal." From that moment on, the case moved from the category of rescue to the category of investigation. A dry entry appeared in the documents. Father and son presumed missing as of July 21, 2014, 07:30 a.m. It seemed that the lake had taken them without a trace, but the reports also left out one detail that would later become important. None of the witnesses heard any distress signals. There were no screams, no shots, no crash noise. They simply disappeared, dissolved between the waves and reeds. That summer, Lake St. Clair became the first place where the community felt powerless in the face of emptiness. The story of Thomas and Ethan began to take on the characteristics of a mystery that went beyond the usual tragedy on the water. On July 25, 2014, the 5th day after the disappearance of Thomas and Ethan Rowling, the lake finally revealed the first traces, but not to official searchers, but to ordinary fishermen. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, 2 local men were returning from their morning fishing trip. 2 kilometers from the shore, they noticed a bright spot among the waves. It turned out to be a life jacket, crumpled and overgrown with algae. The fishermen brought it on board and immediately notified the Coast Guard. Within an hour, experts confirmed that the vest belonged to Thomas. In the afternoon, another group of fishermen walking along the canal to the pier saw an object bobbing on the surface. It was a plastic bait bucket. Inside were the remains of soil and a few decomposed worms. The bucket was immediately recognized as the one seen in the Rowlings' car. 2 accidental finds became the main event of the day. The police officially recorded them in a protocol and called them the first evidence of the presence of a father and son on the water after leaving the dock. The search headquarters came up with the first version of the accident that evening. The boat could have overturned, and the current could have blown things away. However, there were as many doubts as answers. The vest was unbuttoned. Thomas always made Ethan fasten the buckles, and he did the same. Why this time it was open remained unclear. The second version is crime. The police report was dry. Outside interference is not excluded. The absence of a boat and bodies does not allow us to draw a final conclusion. But despite the sensationalism of the findings, they did not bring the search any closer to a resolution. The boat was never found, nor were the bodies. The lake gave up only crumbs, leaving the main thing in secret. The findings that were supposed to be the key only confused the investigation. And then, for the first time, the wording appeared in the reports. The case is taking on the characteristics of an unsolved disappearance. 9 years after the disappearance of Thomas and Ethan Rowling, no breakthroughs have been made. The case was officially listed as unsolved. Every year, on July 21st, a small memorial ceremony was held in Harrison Township. Friends and neighbors gathered at the pier, lit candles, and let them float. The boat was never found, nor were the bodies. For the community, this became a painful wound that did not heal over time. In August of 2023, when the summer heat dried up the shores and the lake level dropped to record lows, a construction company was working to clear the dried-up section of the bay. The excavators were digging a drainage channel when the bucket of one of them hit a metal casing filled with sand. At first, the driver thought it was a piece of an old barge, many of which remained at the bottom after the turbulent 90s. But when the ground was dug away, it became clear they were looking at a small motorboat. The news immediately reached the police. Within an hour, the site of the discovery was surrounded by tape. Forensic experts recorded the coordinates and began the examination. The report states, "The body is largely destroyed by corrosion. The seats are damaged, the upholstery fabric is destroyed. The interior is partially filled with sand." Several small objects were found near the boat: rusty nails, pieces of fabric that could not be identified. But the main discovery was an artifact found under a layer of sand near the passenger seat. It was a small wooden figure in the shape of a fish. It looked strange, carefully carved by hand, with distinct outlines of fins and tail. A sign was engraved on one side, a triangle intersecting with a circle. The symbol did not resemble any factory markings and looked as if it had been applied on purpose. Investigators immediately noticed that none of the rollings could have left this item behind. It is known that Thomas always carried only practical equipment with him. Ethan had sporting interests, but did not collect such souvenirs. The origin of the figurine remained a mystery. The inspection of the site lasted several days. Journalists quickly learned about the discovery, and the next morning the headlines in local newspapers were full of stories. Rolling's boat found under the sand. Mysterious figure may be the key. Photos from the site spread on social media, and people wrote dozens of comments and shared their own theories. This opened a new stage for the police. So far, the main version was an accident on the water, but now everything has become more complicated. How did the boat end up under a layer of sand in a dried-up bay if the search was conducted in this very area back in 2014? And most importantly, where did the wooden fish with the sign come from? The figurine was sent to the laboratory. Experts noted that it was made of red cedar, a tree that does not grow in this region. It was handmade, with no traces of modern tools. The symbol looked primitive, but at the same time, it was applied with amazing precision. The forensic report states, the object has ritual or decorative features. No practical purpose has been established. The discovery caused a new wave of fear and rumors in the community. Some recalled old legends about the fisherman's mark, a symbol left by smugglers in the 19th century to mark caches. Others spoke of something mystical. The figurine could be a kind of amulet or a sign of a curse. For the Rolling family, the discovery was another challenge. Alice, who had been living for 9 years in anticipation of at least some kind of answer, now had even more questions. That sign didn't belong to Thomas, she told reporters. If the boat was there all along, why wasn't it found? And who put that fish there? 9 years of silence turned into a new mystery. The boat that disappeared with the people returned, but it did not bring comfort. Instead, it became a carrier of someone else's mysterious message. The discovery changed the direction of the investigation. The police reopened the case, trying to reconstruct the events of that July morning. But the answers that investigators were looking for remained outside the protocols. The lake seemed to refuse to give up its secret again. The fish-shaped figurine found in the boat became the main find in the Rawlings case. The first results of the examination only confirmed its strangeness. It was a handmade product made of red cedar, a tree that does not grow in this region. But it was not the material that attracted the investigators' attention, but the symbol on the side, a triangle encircled by a circle. In August of 2023, the police invited a consultant to the case, a former customs agent who had worked in the Great Lakes in the 90s. His comment was unexpected. It looks like a mark used by smugglers. They would leave such a mark on boxes or caches so that their own people would know where the goods were. This conclusion changed the tone of the investigation. Previously, the tragedy had been viewed as an accident on the water, but now there was a version that Thomas and Ethan could have accidentally stumbled upon a place that was used for illegal operations. Investigators raised archived criminal cases. Protocols from the mid-90s mentioned several groups involved in the transportation of alcohol, cigarettes, and weapons across the lake. They used small motorboats similar to the one in which the Rawlings disappeared. One of the experts in the field of organized crime said in a comment to the police, "The symbol carved into the figure could be more than just a mark. For some groups, it meant silence, a warning to those who saw too much. If this is true, then the presence of the artifact in the boat could be a sign that the father and son had become unwanted witnesses." The press reacted instantly. Newspapers ran headlines, fish symbol linked to 90s smuggling, and Rowling's boat hid a criminal mark. Society started talking again about the case, which had been forgotten for 9 years. People discussed whether the old groups could retain influence and continue to operate in the region. In September, the police officially changed the wording of the report. "We are considering the possibility of unauthorized interference in the disappearance of Thomas and Ethan Rawling. An artifact suggests a possible connection with illegal transportation on the lake." The news was painful for the family. Alice repeatedly told journalists, "Thomas has never had any relationship with crime. He just went fishing with our son. If this is true, then they have become hostages to someone else's business." The figure has become a symbol of a new phase of the investigation. It changed the way we think about the event, making it not only a personal tragedy, but also an echo of old criminal schemes. However, the main question remained: is it possible to use this symbol to find specific people and learn the truth about that July morning? After the high-profile publications about the fish-shaped figure, the police began receiving dozens of calls. Most of them turned out to be speculation and rumors, but there was one that forced investigators to open old journals in a different way. In early October 2023, the department received a call from an elderly man, a former fisherman named Henry Baxter. He was 68 years old, lived near Harrison Township, and now retired to a small house on the beach. Henry said briefly, "I've seen that symbol before. It used to be called the sign of the Bay of the Dead." During the interrogation, he said that in the 90s he was fishing for fish for resale. Back then, he said, some places in the bay had a reputation for danger. From time to time, one could see strange markings on old wooden piles or stones. Among them was a symbol, a triangle with a circle. In the fishing community, it was called the sign of the Gulf of the Dead. No one explained its meaning, but everyone knew that it was better not to stop there. The investigators were interested not only in this testimony. Henry suddenly recalled the events of the night of July 21st, 2014. According to him, he was also at the lake that night. He went out at midnight to check the nets, and around 2 in the morning, he heard an unusual motor hum coming from the very bay that was once called Dead. "At first I thought it was tourists," he explained, "but then I heard screams. Men's voices, someone was screaming very loudly, and then everything stopped. The engine rumbled for a while, and then stopped." The investigators who took the testimony did not hide their surprise. Why didn't he report it earlier? Henry's answer was simple, yet disturbing. "In those years, I was used to keeping my mouth shut. I knew that there were people in the Bay Area who were better off not dealing with. When I heard about the disappearance of my father and son, I was afraid that I would be dragged into it. I kept silent because I was afraid for myself and my family." His testimony was recorded on a dictaphone, and the protocol was added to the case file. Now the police had a new lead. Someone had actually seen, or at least heard, the boat that night, and that could explain why it never returned to the marina. The news of the witness quickly reached journalists. The newspapers came out with headlines: "The Bay of the Dead has re-emerged," and "New witness heard screams that night." For the community, this was further proof that the Rawlings' story had a darker side than it seemed 9 years ago. The police began to investigate Baxter's testimony. The report stated, "The witness was a resident of the area, and his account is consistent with the noise of the engines at the time. There is no direct evidence, but the testimony is not inconsistent with the facts." The figure, with the strange sign and the old fisherman's memories, formed a chain that led to the ancient legends of the Bay of the Dead. From there, perhaps, the path to the truth about the fate of Thomas and Ethan lay. But even with the new details, there was still a feeling that the real mystery was hidden deeper than simple criminal versions. For if Henry heard screams, who exactly was screaming, and why did the lake take not only lives, but also the boat itself for almost a decade? In the fall of 2023, the investigation into the Rawlings case took on a new dimension. After Henry Baxter's testimony about the Bay of the Dead, the police focused on all the sites along the coast that could have been used by smugglers. One such site was an abandoned warehouse a few kilometers from Harrison Township. The building had been empty for more than a decade, with broken windows, a sagging roof, and graffiti on the walls. At first glance, it looked like a typical facility that attracted only teenagers and homeless people. However, archival documents showed that in the 90s, the warehouse belonged to a company that was later suspected of money laundering. The operatives decided to check the premises again, this time in light of the new circumstances. On October 22nd, a group of investigators and forensic experts entered the building. The main halls were empty. Old wooden boxes, pieces of furniture, broken glass. Everything looked as if the building had been abandoned in a hurry. However, in the basement, where a narrow metal staircase led down, they found an unexpected discovery. In the far corner, behind a pile of garbage, they found an old chest covered with a tarpaulin. Inside were several items that immediately attracted attention. The first was fishing gear: a fishing rod, a reel, and a box of hooks. The condition of the items showed that they had been there for many years, but the markings on the reel matched the one Thomas had bought shortly before he disappeared. The second item was even more disturbing: a map, yellowed with age and with numerous creases. It marked the shores of Lake St. Clair, and several points were highlighted with a red marker. Among them is a place that old fishermen still call the Bay of the Dead. The experts immediately recorded the discovery. The report noted, "The map was probably a working tool for marking routes or hiding places. Traces of ink and paper correspond to the period of the late 90s and early 20s. The appearance of the map confirmed the theory that the Rowlings could have accidentally stumbled upon the territory used for illegal transportation. If they saw something extra, it could have been fatal." Journalists instantly picked up the news. The headlines appeared on the front pages: "A map of the Bay of the Dead found in the basement of an abandoned warehouse," and "The Rowling case is linked to smugglers." The community was divided. Some believed in the crime version, while others believed that the police were only trying to explain the tragedy with a mystical legend. But for the investigators, the situation was clear. The figure from the boat, the witnesses' words about the screams, and now the map from the basement all pointed in the same direction. It was no coincidence. The Rowlings were in the wrong place at the wrong time. One of the investigators officially stated in a comment, "The findings confirm that the incident could have had a criminal background. We have reason to believe that the father and son witnessed illegal activities on the lake." The warehouse was closed and sealed after the search. All items were transported to an expert center for further investigation. But even without the final results, it was clear that the case, which had been considered a mystery of the elements for 9 years, was increasingly turning into a story about someone else's criminal secret, in which Thomas and Ethan were accidental victims. After the findings in the abandoned warehouse, the police officially announced that the case of Thomas and Ethan Rowling had been reopened. It was a sensation. For the first time in 9 years since the disappearance, the investigation had received a new status. However, along with the media attention, the main question returned: are the investigators at least one step closer to an answer? Experts carefully examined the map labeled Gulf of the Dead and the fishing gear found in the basement. The conclusion was cautious. The items most likely belonged to Thomas, and the map was used in the late 90s to navigate the lake. However, it was not possible to link these items directly to the day the father and son disappeared. The main evidence remained a wooden fish-shaped figurine found in the boat. Its symbol, a triangle with a circle, became an unofficial sign of the case itself. All articles and television reports were now accompanied by an image of this figurine. For the investigators, it was a key. For the community, a chilling reminder of the tragedy. And for the family, a painful symbol of loss. However, without the Rowlings' bodies, no version could be proven. The police had two main hypotheses. The first, Thomas and Ethan accidentally witnessed illegal activity on the lake, possibly related to smuggling. In this case, they could have been eliminated and the boat hidden in the bay, where it was later covered with sand. Second, an accident on the water. Perhaps the boat capsized, things were blown away by the current, and the found items only create the illusion of a criminal overtone. None of the hypotheses had decisive evidence. The bodies were never found, neither in the lake nor on the shore. Even after repeated examinations by divers and the use of modern drones with depth cameras, the result was zero. The lake remained silent. In December 2023, the prosecutor's office held a briefing. The spokesman said, "The case has been officially reopened, but there is not enough evidence to press charges. We are considering various versions, including criminal ones." When journalists asked whether Thomas and Ethan could be considered dead, the spokesperson replied, "Their status remains missing." For the community, this meant only one thing: the mystery continues. People continued to discuss the case in coffee shops and at fishing competitions. Some claimed that it was the fault of smugglers who did not want any witnesses. Others argued that it was an accident and the symbol on the figurine was just a coincidence. For the family, there were no answers. Alice refused to comment to the press, but in private conversations, she repeated herself. "I only want to know one thing, where they are. At least a place to put flowers." As a result, the Rowling case remained in limbo. Formally, it was reopened, but in fact the investigation hit a blank wall. The fish-shaped figurine became the only tangible evidence and at the same time, a symbol of the mystery that no one could solve. Were Thomas and Ethan murdered because they were accidental witnesses to a crime? Or did they die as a result of a fatal incident on the water? Or perhaps the lake hides another story that no one knows about? There are no answers. There is only a disturbing understatement that continues to hang over the waters of St. Clair, reminding us that even after 9 years, the lake does not let go of its secrets.